Happy Women's Day, everyone, and welcome to the Palais, and welcome to this unique, well, not so unique anymore, but still unique event. I'm very happy to celebrate International Women's Day with you, but I'm also happy that because we have so many activities here, we've decided to make it into an International Women's Week rather than just a day. And this is not just only about raising awareness, but it's about actions, and it's about the results of what we've been doing in this town, particularly on gender equality, and what we need to do more to improve progress and improve progress on also on reaching the Sustainable Development Goals. So thank you for being with us today for this special iteration of So What series of the SDG Lab. Your presence today testifies both to your commitment to gender equality, to sustainable city and communities, and to the SDGs more broadly, I hope. I very much also welcome the diversity in the room, which translates the spirit with which we're all trying to implement the 2030 Agenda. We talk at length about the paradigm shifts of this agenda, universality, indivisibility, and the importance of multi-stakeholder approach. And this is precisely what the So What series is about, to demonstrate the unexpected linkages between two goals, the power of thinking and acting in an intersectoral way, and how the commitment of different stakeholders can make a collective response more sustainable and more impactful. And today, as you know, we'll be looking at the linkages between SDG 5 on gender equality and SDG 11 on sustainable cities and communities, and hopefully listen to very concrete examples of the benefits of doing so. And I hope that this event today will continue to be a source of inspiration and to contribute to shift our mindsets towards appreciating how best to break the silos that definitely need to be broken down and what it actually means in practice. So let me end by thanking UN Women, DCAF, the City of Geneva, and the International Gender Champions Initiative for joining force with the SDG Lab in making this event happen. This, too, is the SDGs in practice. So I look forward to listening to our speakers, to learn about their experiences, and to see how we can move our collective effort forward. Thank you very much for being here.
I'll use this one. Thank you very much, Director General. Good afternoon, everyone. What a pleasure to see you today. And thank you very much, Mr. Muller, for your introductory remarks, and above all, for being with us today. We know it's a very busy week and a very busy day, and the fact that you have reserved time to come to our event is really a testimony of your support to the SDG Lab, to our work, but also just demonstrating once again what a great gender champion you are and also an SDG champion. Thank you very much for that. So, Excellencies, colleagues, dear friends, I see a packed room. Thank you for coming this afternoon. We know there were a lot of parallel events going on today, but the fact that you decided to come here is a great honor. And I really hope we're going to have a great session. I actually have absolutely no doubt that it's going to be a great session, just seeing the great speakers that have accepted to join us this afternoon. My name is Nadia Isler, and I'm the director of the SDG Lab. Many of you know about the SDG Lab. Some of you that have maybe just arrived in Geneva don't know yet about us. Actually, we're quite a pretty new initiative, actually. We were established just under a year ago in the office of Director General Muller, the head of the UN here at Geneva. And everything we do in the SDG Lab is about turning the paradigm shifts of Agenda 2030 into practice, or contributing to doing so. And everything we do is about promoting a multi-stakeholder approach. And I think, as the Director General was saying, the diversity in the room really demonstrates that the Geneva ecosystem is diverse and wants to get together in demonstrating that we're more than the sum of our parts and supporting the implementation of the agenda. And the other paradigm shift, which was so fundamental when the SDGs were adopted, is the indivisibility of the goals. And this is also one of the paradigms that at the SDG Lab we try, together with all of you and partners here today, to actually show in practice the benefits of this indivisibility and having an intersectoral, integrated approach to the agenda. As we all know, it's not just a theoretical paradigm. It actually, there is a benefit in doing so. There's a social, an environment, and an economic case and a development case to be made in having an integrated approach. But we also know that an integrated approach doesn't just happen. We can have a beautiful agenda that sets that paradigm. We can have wonderful multi-stakeholder ministerial task force and whatnot, yet it doesn't always happen. And today's speakers will be talking about what drove them actually as policymakers and practitioners to connect goals, and in particular, Goal 5 and Goal 11 today. So we thought indeed that on the occasion of International Women's Day, it made sense to look a little bit more at SDG 5, but also at SDG 11 and how they're interconnected. Now, today we're making the connection between two goals, but we're all aware, right, that it could be a mistake in only crossing two. So although we'll be very much focusing on these two goals, we're well aware that the connections in the targets under those two goals go way beyond just connecting 5 and 11. But the idea of today is just to take a little bit of a deep dive in those two goals to show those benefits. So SDG 5, as you all know, is about achieving gender equality and empower women and girls. And SDG 11 is about making cities and human settlements inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable. We also know that 54.3% of the world population is urbanized today. This was also one of the reasons we really wanted to tackle that interconnection. But also because SDG 11 is one of the SDGs that will be reviewed in depth at the High-Level Political Forum in July in New York this year. Let me reiterate what a great privilege it is to be organizing this event with UN Women. The director of the Liaison office is here with us, with the Geneva Centre for the Democratic Control of Armed Forces, known as DCAF, the City of Geneva, as well as the International Gender Champion Initiative. And I'm particularly honored to have with us today 5 wonderful speakers. Each speaker will bring a very different approach or a very different experience to crossing these two goals. And this was really deliberate. We wanted to show that under each and one of those goals, we have a series of different targets. And each and one of those targets is fundamental and deserves a certain approach, but above all, they're all connected. So making progress in one target will inherently also accelerate responses in other targets. So before kickstarting our conversation, I think I've spoken enough, I definitely have, but I'd like to share with you the following. First of all, that we're being broadcasted live on UN Web TV today, so webtv.un.org, which is great, and I'd like to thank all our colleagues that have made this possible. Secondly, you probably all have your phones, although you're not bored enough yet to be on them. I'm sure you have them in your pockets. Take them out and go on slido.com and enter the code 9501. And on Slido, you will be able to ask questions in an anonymous way, or if you'd like to put your name, of course, you're welcome to do so. But you can interact directly with the speakers, which will allow me as a moderator also to then ask pertinent questions if I see that many of you have a similar kind of question. So let's see if this works today. I've used this many times in events, and I have to say I find it's a great tool. So let's try it this afternoon. Also, follow us on Twitter. Our handle is SDG Lab. Lots of different hashtags, but the So What series hashtag, International Women's Day 2018, also tweet. It's disappeared. My colleague will get it back on now. And last but not least, after this event, there'll be a cocktail which was generously offered, and thank you very much, by DCAF, by the City of Geneva, by UN Women too. And there's a media wall here where we would love also to interview any of you that have something to say about crossing these two goals as they relate to your experience, whether it's a positive experience or your question you may have. We would love to hear your voices. This is all about daring to sharing what works and what doesn't work. And so if any of you would like, at the end of the meeting, to speak to my colleagues, most welcome at the interview corner. Okay, I think now, Mike, Patrick, I think I'll kind of walk around. All right. Good afternoon, colleagues. Thank you again for being with us. I'd first like to give the floor to Monica Martinez. Monica Martinez is a diplomat, minister at the Permanent Mission of Ecuador to the UN here in Geneva. And the reason why I wanted to give Monica the floor at the outset is because, as you know, Quito was actually hosted in 2016 the Habitat 3 conference, where the new urban agenda was adopted by member states. So I thought it was only normal and fair in recognition of your great work that we give you the floor first, just to, in just a few minutes, to frame what the urban agenda is all about. And then I'll obviously afterwards give you also an opportunity to speak about your national and city level actions. But if you could just give us a few words on that agenda, that would be wonderful. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Nadia. It's really a pleasure and honor to be invited to give a few words. I know that you want me to speak, just 2 minutes. It's difficult. It's difficult when you have too much to say and too much to thank. I would really like to thank UN Women because most of the things that I'm going to present on showcasing, it's also because of the relationship that we have with UN Women and UNDP at the national level. Since when I get excited, then I try to speak a lot, so I'm going to read what I thought about the glimpse of the United Nations Conference on Housing and Sustainable Urban Development, Habitat 3, that took place in Quito in October 2016, where the new urban agenda was adopted with the participation of subnational and local governments, parliamentarians, civil society, indigenous peoples and local communities, the private sector, professional and practitioners, the scientific and academic community, and other relevant stakeholders. I think this is one of the paradigm shifts that you were talking about. So this I would say inclusive participation of all different stakeholders. I'm not going to repeat all the commitments contained in the new urban agenda, but to recall that its implementation was linked directly to the implementation and localization of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development in an integrated manner. So we think global, but we act local. We have the Sustainable Development goals, but we have an urban agenda that is the practical way to implement SDGs. So this is very much the link with goal 11, making cities and human settlements inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustained. And also today we're making the link with mainstreaming gender equality and women's empowerment, goal 5. Since the adoption of the new agenda, new urban agenda in Quito 2016, many initiatives like safe cities and safe public spaces, safe cities free of violence against women and girls, participatory and inclusive land readjustment, the City Prosperity Initiative, etc. So many initiatives have been, are in place. Nevertheless, there is much more to be done, as recognized at the World Urban Forum celebrated a month ago in Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia, where the need to localize and scale up the implementation of the new urban agenda was recognized as an accelerator to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. So I think that's the second message. We need to accelerate, scale up, and I think this is an opportunity to do that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Monica, for reminding us the backdrop, right? The sort of frame in which we're thinking and operating today. And this new urban agenda was really about rethinking the way we build, the way we manage, and the way we live in urban cities. And as you said, it's very much about an integrated approach. I'd like to give the floor now after this framing, to our first speaker. Our first speaker is Héloïse Roman from La Ville de Genève. As a Genevoise, I can't say that in English. I have to say La Ville de Genève. And you work for the Service Agenda 21, Ville Durable. And you specialize on considerations of gender issues in public projects in the city. And I know Geneva has come a long way in thinking of how to embed equality actually at large in the city, but that your first entry point was very much with a sort of value-based driven approach. So tell us more about how the city of Geneva has integrated gender equality in its urban policies, and what were your actual drivers or incentives in doing so?
Thank you. Good afternoon to all. Thank you for the invitation, and I'm very happy to be here this afternoon. Yes, so at the level of the city, we've been developing a gender equality policy for about 10 years now, and maybe I start with the motivation or the incentive, because it was very much a political decision. The head of, well, we have, as you know, a government of the city is like 5 elected members. And so one of them, Mrs. Salerno, who is my political boss, she came into office about 10 years ago, maybe. And from the start, she was very committed to gender equality, diversity, the fight against homophobia and transphobia as well. So she really pushed and really make it possible for the city to develop a gender equality policy. So we've been working on it for the last 10 years, and of course it started at the beginning by stating what were the values of the city, and to commit to some charters and some regulations and so on. And we also have the Swiss constitutions and all the general regulations in Switzerland that give us the basic regulations to work on gender equality. But then the whole work that was done was to set up a policy, and basically there are 3 manners that we work on gender equality right now. The first one is to work directly on discrimination that women are facing. So it's like to develop raising awareness projects on gender equality. It can be campaigns, it can be working with a lot of different partners, organizing trainings, and like working with municipal libraries, for instance, on promoting a gender-free, non-stereotype and inclusive literature, or that kind of things. The second work that we are doing is to work on all the policies of the city, and to make sure that gender equality is mainstreamed into all the public policies of the city, so that we can assure that the city is not, at least not reproducing discrimination, and even better if it can also promote gender equality. So that's a very long term and working very, like it's a work in progress, and we are always like developing new dimensions and new projects with the different units and of the city who are working on different policies of the city. So it can be childcare services, it can be working on sport issues and gender equality in sport, it can be working on public space, it can be working on well, all the skills and the public policies that the city is developing. And then the last point that is also very important is that if you are advocating for gender equality towards the public of the city, then we have to be exemplary as well and make sure that the policies, the behavior that the city has towards, for instance, its employees is also promoting gender equality. So there is a lot of work that is done internally as well to make sure that professional gender equality is promoted, and that to eliminate the discrimination that women face in the labor market, but that they can also face in the public administration.
Thank you very much. Maybe in 2 seconds, what do you say were the main results, or the unexpected results that came out of such an integrated approach to your policy and thinking?
Well, I think it takes a lot of time internally and externally to promote a gender equality policy. But what is interesting is that, like, changing practices and changing mentalities, it's possible as long as you put the resources and the means, and you can always come back and come back and come back, and hope that with time it changes. And I think it does change on the long term, but it's a very long term process, and you must always, like, keep the work and never stop and always come back. And maybe one thing that is interesting also is that I work in a service which is called Agenda 21. So it's a service it's a unit that is working on all the topics of sustainable development. So it's not only gender equality, but it's also diversity, LGBT rights, environments, and how we build a society and a city that is more environmentally, but also economically and also socially responsible. And that's also allow us to take into account intersectionalities and the multiple dimensions of sustainable development. And it allows us to have a very concrete work, and I think it's an interesting way of approaching all these issues.
Sorry, and then I'll go to our next speaker, but I think just to bounce on your point here, was that deliberate from the outset to have those different sectors represented? Or did it come ex post after seeing that you were missing an integrated approach? Was it from the outset that you had these different sectors represented around the table?
Well, it built up like progressively. At the beginning, Agenda 21, the unit I'm working in, was only about environment, but quite rapidly it became also about gender equality, and then we had also all the issues on local participation who came to the unit. Then also LGBT rights were the last topic that came into our service 5 years ago. So it built up progressively, but it was like quite rapidly we could see the interest of putting all these issues together. It's also a political choice at some point.
So by seeing the results, it just reinforced the fact that that was the way to go, the way forward.
And I think also politically things are building up, because also some people are driving for these processes, and I think that like there is a logic in for us to build the unit in the way it was built, but then it's also politically because someone was...
There's a demand for
like,
it.
Yeah,
is asking for it. That's interesting. That's an interesting point. Very interesting, because we often talk about the political will, which is also driven by civil society and demand coming from outside, and it sounds as though that was one of the motivations.
Yeah, and maybe just one little thing before, like 10 years ago or even 5 years ago, most of the people, they wouldn't understand why gender equality was with environment and why economy and why all these issues together. But today it's like maybe in the UN you were more used to this kind of multidimensional topics and discussion. I don't know.
I can reassure you, it doesn't just happen.
No, it didn't just happen, but maybe it was things that were coming like more and more, and it was easier to understand this at an international level than at the local level, because in the end we are maybe the only city in Switzerland that is working this way. Most of the cities, they have, or canton, they have a gender equality office, they have a environmental office, they have a integration office for foreigners, but they don't have all these issues put together. But today, like most of the people, they understand that it's linked, and that you don't only work on environment, but you also work on social issues of sustainability.
Excellent. We'll probably get back to that question later, because it's a fascinating one when we think of integration doesn't just happen. But I'd like to give the floor now to Ms. Jane Tansley. Jane, thank you so much for joining us today. Jane is the director of Force Internationale and a former police officer. So Jane was a police officer for more than 27 years and now runs her own company. And her company offers advice on human rights, on gender capacity building and mainstreaming. And Jane continues to support gender-responsive policing initiatives throughout the world, but in particular, if I understand correctly, in Eastern Europe, as well as in Egypt. So maybe, Jane, it's such a privilege to have someone that has had such a long experience, I'd say hands-on, directly in the ground with people. You are the incarnation of a practitioner. And it sounds as though now you've developed your career towards also policy, etc. But tell us more about your experience on the ground in terms of the benefits of involving women in policy making, involving their experience in urban settings, in making cities more safe, more resilient, and just a better place to live. Tell us about it, Jane.
Thank you. Those who know me know I could talk about this for an awful long time, but I haven't got a long time. Regarding the interoperability of SDGs, a lot of what I could bring would touch on SDG 16, which is, of course, security as well. But I think traditionally policing, security and safety is thought of in silos. I mean, even in my experience from UK policing, you know, it was certainly when I first joined, it was very rare that the police were consulted on buildings, architects, you know, putting up buildings in city centres. Whereas now most forces in the UK have architectural liaison officers. So the whole idea is that during the planning and the development stages, you're actually thinking and getting that impact, not just about designing out crime, for want of a better expression, but also by engaging with organisations such as, I mean, internationally, International Association of Women Police, which I'm a former president of, you know, we can give the people who are building policies in cities, who are developing buildings, developing urban areas, the perspective from the woman's point of view, not just women in policing, and there's a whole debate on their perspective, but about women and girls in communities. And so, you know, there's a lot of work, a huge amount of work still to be done. Geneva, you know, this is my first time in this city, and I arrived in the evening, it's dark. Yeah, okay, I'm an ex-police officer, but I haven't got a radio, I haven't got any protective equipment, and I got off at the wrong bus stop. But anyway, so I had to do quite a bit of walking. Fortunately, it's the French-speaking area, so limited French. But I actually was thinking, even just doing that one thing, getting off public transport and finding my way to my hotel, I felt relatively safe. Now, that's not the case in an awful lot of countries, and you touched on the work in Egypt. In Egypt, I've been delivering training to police officers in Egypt on their response to violence against women. And it is amazing when you talk to them and start having discussions about the impact of not dealing with these issues. You know, it's not just an impact on the victims, which of course is a huge impact, the trauma, but it has a knock-on impact. It can actually impact on a city's economic situation, let alone a country. So if you don't deal with and provide ready access to justice for women in those urban communities, you know, the broader impact can actually have an impact on the economy of a country. Egypt has a huge problem, well, I say huge, Cairo has a problem of women, sexual harassment of women in public spaces. Now, there's been a lot of work done on that to make their city safer so that women have a right to go to a demonstration or go to a protest or go anywhere in a public space, an event, a celebration, and not be sexually harassed. But conversely, that also was an issue. I'll give you an actual example in London. You know, traditionally, every August holiday, bank holiday, there's a big carnival, Notting Hill Carnival. It's a West Indian-based carnival. And annually, the Metropolitan Police were getting huge issues with women becoming victims of violence, where they were being sexually harassed and sexually assaulted during the crowded public spaces. So the Metropolitan Police had to think about, okay, we need to address this, A, to protect these women and prevent it happening, and also how do we deal with it? And they actually evolved a specific tactic that they used in these crowded spaces, where they monitor the space, they're looking out for potential criminals, and when they spot them, they have a tactic in place where the police officers go in, they surround the victim, and they surround, it's usually a gang of males, and they basically take them out. But everybody else who's enjoying the festivities don't really see this happening. But again, that is something that was having an impact on the city of London and broader London. You know, why would all these, certainly people from abroad, come to attend such a fantastic event if the reputation was, you know, they were at risk?
So Jane, is that your experience? Because from the outset you said that not all the cities feel safe. You were giving the example of when you arrived in Geneva, etc. Based on your previous experience, what have been the drivers or the incentives of cities where money has been invested in prevention, etc.? What were really their drivers? Was it linked to the economic case, or linked to tourism and recognition of a safe city or a non-safe city? What were really the arguments that made certain cities actually invest in such actions?
I think it's bespoke, really, for the different types of environment and cities you're talking about. A lot of it is economics, you know. But actually, some cities have done it because it's the right thing to do, because at the end of the day, you know, women have as much rights, have human rights, and so some of the cities have done it because it's the right thing to do. If you think about, from an economic perspective, or even from education, you know, we know globally that women, young girls, are less likely to be educated in certain countries. So, but if part of that problem is because their journey to work or their journey to receive education is not safe for them, they're not likely to make that journey. So when big businesses and companies are considering where they are going to locate in cities around the world, they should be looking at those cities that provide safe environment, because if they are industries that predominantly employ women, and women do not feel safe or are not safe, perception and reality, we know, can be a huge difference. So there's a lot around getting the message out there that, you know, it is a safe place, that people who disrespect that safety and commit offences against women, it won't be tolerated. Because if women are not feeling safe even to go to work, or perhaps come home from work in an evening, you know, there are the much broader impacts on that for the future economy of a city, a country, and beyond. So, yeah, I mean, I've got lots of other examples.
Thanks a lot, Jen. And we'll have an opportunity to speak afterwards. I know a lot of you either have experience or burning questions, and I promise I'll just have a first round of sort of introductory remarks by all the speakers, and then I'll straight away open it up. Do use also Slido if you have questions. Thanks a lot, Jane. Our third speaker is Leonard Doyle. Leonard Doyle is the spokesperson for the International Organization for Migration, based here in Geneva. It's such a pleasure to have you here. Considering the context, the international context we're living in, it's a particular pleasure to have you to come also with the migration dimension of things, recognizing that so many migrants are migrating in urban settings. And could you maybe illustrate through examples of either personal experiences or your agency's experiences on how you have tackled specific urban setting challenges linked to migrants through the lens of gender equality, and what have been the positive outcomes? Or you may also have examples that show the opposite, the negative effects of not adopting such an approach.
Great, so thank you so much for inviting me. It's an absolute pleasure to be on a perfectly gender-balanced panel, which is a rare and wonderful thing to be on. But thanks a lot. So I'll just talk a little bit about my background is as a communicator, as a journalist for many, many years, and in the last short while working for the UN Migration Agency, as it's now called, the IOM. But I'll talk a little bit about Haiti and maybe about the Philippines, where I have direct experience from working there. So Haiti, after the earthquake, really interesting place because you have 1 million people plus suddenly displaced and living under canvas. And as you know, was vividly demonstrated to me by a young woman one day, even with UN patrols wandering this way and that, a razor blade, just like that, on a tent, and an intruder is in, you know, molesting, violating, raping somebody. It's very, very difficult to imagine how you could protect that person because the UN troops literally had just walked by. So how does that work? And do we as international people, as the UN, do we think hard enough? Do we really drill down and say, how can we keep people safe in these really traumatic times? I don't think we do, to be honest, and I think, you know, there's multiple examples of how things can be improved, but the two things that give me hope is two of the things I've been listening to here are the economics of the situation and the communication of the situation. I mean, it's obvious to everybody that if you're missing half the moon, you're just getting half the story. You're not getting a whole and vibrant economy if the female quotient of it, isn't properly engaged in it. And that's sadly the case in all too many countries around the world where, for whatever historical reasons, we don't need to go near those, the female part of the story isn't empowered enough and don't bring the values that they have to the story, and so you get suboptimal outcomes. I'll give you one anecdote. Since I'm Irish, I'm supposed to talk a bit, I've been told earlier, but anyway. So I was in Haiti and we did a communications project, a nice thing where we empowered people to be community journalists, community citizen journalists we call them, in a place called Korai. So Korai was the equivalent of the Salev. So imagine the top of the Salev, let's say there's a big camp here and we say, it's much better for you to go over there, you'd be decongested. It wasn't such a great idea, but they were moved there. And they were living in the heat and in the Caribbean sun for month upon month. And then eventually the machinery of international aid clanked into gear, and lo and behold, a big school was built. Beautiful perimeter around it, fantastic school. Then we had an event to celebrate all this stuff and a little art exhibition like we like to do. And one of our community journalists, her name was Getty, feisty woman, was at this event. Indeed, there were even questions whether we should invite beneficiaries to the event. Maybe we would raise their expectations by having them around the nice surrounds of an international hotel. Indeed, they came, and the exhibition is happening, and the head of one of the big international organizations that had built the school was there. So I said, let's meet, let's have a little meet-up and chat. And Getty said to this anonymous person, how are you doing? How's everything? And the lady said, or it was a man actually, the man said, well, you should be so happy now you've got this great school up in Korai. And Getty said, yes, we're delighted. The school is fantastic, but do you think we could have some teachers? And you know, this was a moment of truth to power that came kind of accidentally, and I think these accidents is not the way to do it. We need to make systemic change. We need to get people like Getty into the system and get this wisdom transmitted where it matters. Because there were teachers there within a couple of weeks, I think the message was quickly transmitted. And how do you
get to the school also, right? The actual transport?
Well, the school was in the middle of the camp, but transport is, of course, another issue. And just to quickly say, I mean, I come from the International Organization for Migration. As my boss used to say, that is a subject. It wasn't exactly a pickup line in a bar 5 or 10 years ago. People would walk away from you, but today it's a big subject. You know, it's every newspaper, everybody, everywhere, every country is talking about migration because there are 375 million migrants in the world. The world is on the move. Maybe it's a global elite that moves freely and easily, and that's probably us. But out there are many people on the move, and they're moving to urban centers to link up 5 and 11. They're moving to cities that are not necessarily sustainable, or they're trying to be sustainable, but they don't have the infrastructure. They're living in tenements, they're living in squatter camps, and they're invisible to the public sector. I think that's one of the big challenges. How do we ensure that the great talent of these migrants, who are really entrepreneurial in spirit, is tapped and creates these sustainable cities? And that's kind of a bit of a gap.
And maybe, Leonard, while other speakers are talking, you can think also of some positive examples. You may have some today in terms of illustrating how certain policies at urban level actually helped, supported migrant communities in having a safe and happy life in urban settings. I know the good examples don't always come at the forefront, but I'll give you a few more minutes. Now I'd like to give the floor to Manuela. Manuela Papadopoul is a bit of an unexpected speaker, especially here in the sort of surroundings of the UN, because Manuela is the co-founder and managing director of Sansi Consulting, which is a global management and marketing consultant firm. And prior to starting your own business, Manuela, you worked for global business development for Electrobit, a leader in automotive software. So what does automotive software and technology have to do with what we're discussing today? Manuela.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. I'm incredibly excited and humbled to share the stage with you and speak to you about the problems that we're all facing. Software has everything to do with our lives. I mean, we're all dependent on this small device, and we didn't have it 10 years ago. And it's amazing how much software has moved into the car. And I've heard you talk about transportation and the problems that exist there. And then we've also talked about some of the unsafe areas in the city. And self-driving car will solve that. You'll have self-driving shuttles and self-driving vehicles that will pick people up, whether they're kids or women or even senior people. So it's amazing to see the evolution of software inside the car, but also outside the car, how we're going to use it, virtual reality, how we're going to use it in medical devices, and it's incredibly exciting times. Geneva Auto Show is happening right now, and you should go see it. The car is a software on wheels. There's very little hardware left in the car.
Based on all your technological know-how and expertise and experience, how do you see the future of technology actually working for the better in terms of urban settings, in terms of also women's access to services, etc., as we try to focus on SDG 5 and 11? I'm not being obsessed by these two goals. I'm just trying to frame it around this to really see how technology, if you had a crystal ball in front of you, how do you see technology in the future actually benefiting urban settings?
Well, first of all, we need to think about education. And today is International Women's Day, and cheers to all of us out there. But today, I just realized there's 130 million girls that are not in school. That's 130 million potential software developers, doctors, potential leaders, designers, services. They're being stripped from their potential. So through the power of software and through the power of technology, we can diminish this gap. We can actually provide education. We can bring technology in front of girls and boys at younger age. And I firmly believe that we'll be able to communicate better from country to country. We're no longer paying exorbitant amount of money on telephone rates. Right now, we can do FaceTime, and I'm talking to my family. I'm Romanian. I live in Seattle, Washington, but I can talk to my family through and see them every day. So it's incredible, the power of technology. And going back to the gender equality and SDG 5, it's astonishing. 85% of the decision in a household for buying anything in the house, whether it's soap or a car, is done by a woman. Yet only 16% of women have executive roles in an automotive company or a technology company. That's a fundamental gap. And again, circling back to education and technology, if you provide access and if you provide information at a younger age and equality to everyone, I think this shift will happen.
Thank you very much. That's interesting because it brings us back to the very first iteration of the So What series. I see our colleagues from WIPO there in the back, where we actually crossed SDG 5 with SDG 9 on innovation and infrastructure, and demonstrating precisely what you said, that if women and young girls are not actually embedded in the actual framing of the future innovations, etc., they'll be left behind. So I think it's a good illustration also that, you know, today we're looking at two goals, but it's so much more than that, right? Both in terms of challenges, but also opportunities. I'd like to give the floor back to Ecuador. Let's fly back to Ecuador and give Monica the opportunity also to tell us a bit more about what you've been doing in terms of SDG 5 and SDG 11 in Quito. I know Quito is one of the pioneering cities to develop a safe city program, and we'd love to hear a little bit more about it. We have a video also. Would you like to show the video first, or would you first like to make comments and then illustrate it through your video?
As you wish. I think the example of Quito is very illustrative with the help of UN Women. It was launched at Habitat 3. But also I would like to make a reference on the right of housing. which I think it's another element, because I can give a lot of examples of all the three themes that have been discussed previously, but I can also add new dimension, the dimension of housing and the living environment. So, but of course, the case in Quito,
okay, so I suggest we'll just watch a quick video in terms of what you did to diminish sexual harassment for women in the cities, and then I'd like you to give a bit more examples of the other examples that illustrate other targets also of SDG 11 and 5. That would be great.
And to give the positive aspect that you were asking for.
Wonderful. Video. Music without image. It's pretty nice too. We'll give ourselves a few minutes, and otherwise I'll ask you, Monica, to talk to us about the issue while we solve the technological problem, unless Manuela has the key to how to solve it. Okay, Monica, why don't you tell us first about, we'll go back to the experience of Quito on the decreasing sexual harassment, which will be illustrated later with the video, but tell us a little bit more about the other initiatives you've taken at urban level to address urban challenges through the lens of gender equality. So,
I think in the case of Ecuador, we have since 2008 a new constitution. Constitution that is human rights embedded. So from that perspective, it's about what is the right thing to do. And so I would like to refer to the right of housing, and then to take one example that could seem a tragedy. In 2016, we had a big earthquake. 6 provinces were affected. 2 provinces were really devastated. But from the very first moment, the protocols and all the planning that we had before, we were very much on bringing on board the Sendai framework on disaster risk reduction, empower of women. All this had an opportunity to flourish in concrete ways. So, for example, with the support of UN Women, immediately this idea of cash transfer to work and to training, and to allow women to go into different areas like masonry and building, and also programs to quick recovery and going into tourism, food production, and also in the planning on rebuilding the cities. Now you will have these community centers for mothers. So it's not about just building new houses. It's really building community spaces, building the opportunity to for women to empower, to be active part of the economic growth of the city. So that is happening now, and
that was planned beforehand. So it's a successful planning. The vision was correct.
Exactly.
To think about it before.
Well, the vision is about human rights. And then you have to think how to implement, because human rights could sound ideal, nice, but as you were saying, it's then how to implement, how to transform into something concrete. And then you come up with simple ideas, sometimes sophisticated ideas, but at the end of the day, you will have a more of equal society that we were talking about. And now we are going to see the case of
so let's dive
Quito.
now into the concrete example of what you did in another targets, I'd say, of the SDGs to address violence in the city and sexual harassment in particular. Let's have a look at what Quito did.
hemos declarado la guerra al acoso contra la mujer en el transporte público y hemos puesto en marcha un programa que incluye la instalación de módulos de atención a las mujeres víctimas de acoso en el transporte en las diferentes estaciones del sistema.
ONU Mujeres, en coordinación con la Alcaldía del Distrito Metropolitano de Quito, organizaciones de mujeres y también con otros actores, ha iniciado este programa acá en el Ecuador. Los recursos iniciales para implementar este programa fueron de la Agencia Española de Cooperación, de la ESIT. Y gracias a ese impulso inicial, en el 2011 se inició este programa acá en Quito.
Nosotros hemos lanzado un proyecto macro que está enfocado en 4 ejes fundamentales, que es la seguridad vial, es la violencia intrafamiliar, especialmente la violencia contra la mujer, la gestión de riesgos y la convivencia pacífica.
Bueno, estos procesos de capacitación son muy importantes para la toma de conciencia a las mujeres acerca de la violencia de género y ante todo para desnaturalizar la violencia.
Se han desarrollado lo que se conoce como caminatas exploratorias para definir en el espacio qué territorios son riesgosos para las mujeres y de esa manera trabajar en su rescate, dotándolos de infraestructura adecuada, de alumbrado público, mejorando su entorno, convirtiéndolos en espacios que atraigan la convivencia ciudadana.
Toda la caminata que hicimos del recorrido, lo que analizamos fue la cuestión de inseguridad. La idea es implementar un plan en el que las autoridades competentes a esta cuestión puedan ayudarnos a dar un poquito más de seguridad.
Este programa va a ser declarado como un programa emblemático de la ciudad de Quito por el municipio, pero además de eso, no solamente en Quito. Yo creo que este es un programa que deberíamos hacerlo en todas las ciudades.
Thank you very much for sharing this experience through this video, which I think is quite telling. And I was just wondering if you could just make a few comments before I open the floor, because I know a lot of you through Slido, I'm already seeing, have a lot of questions for the speakers. But Monica, could you tell us, I mean, clearly you said it from the outset that it was driven first and foremost through a human rights dimension. Yeah. Could you also, beyond the safety, the obvious safety outcome of this initiative, what are the other outcomes that making transport more secure? What were the other unexpected outcomes or expected outcomes that came out of transport being more safe for women?
Well, as Jane said, when women, they feel free to go out, to go to school, to go to work, that in itself, it's empowering women. And let me say that the program was initiated because there's been a survey in saying that 80% of women in Quito felt insecure when on the street or in public spaces or in public transportation. Mm-hmm.
So this was impeding them from having access to going to work, to having access to medical services, or what were the...
Education, everything. I mean, feeling insecure, could be diminishing your capacity in life because, you know, it's not only that you feel that, okay, I'm not going out of the house, I'm not going to start my own business. It's not. I'm not going to finish school. It's. I cannot cry for help. And then, for example, what Manuela was saying, now through this initiative in Quito, we have these free Wi-Fi spots, so women can really access to internet and call for help. Mm-hmm. And and that is it's wonderful because it's very much connected with the centers that the mayor of Quito was telling about this centers to help women, not only from, I would say, the policy, from the security point of view or the health point of view, but about accompanying women through the process after they denounce that they have been sexual harassed or there's a violent case. But let me give you a positive example on the housing. On the housing.
And then
we had...
We have to be short, Monica, but I would love to have a good...
Just because of the numbers that I think are important. So we have 325,000 new houses. So for a country that it's, only 14 million people, almost 500,000 new houses in 4 years is, we are talking big numbers in economic terms. And so this is going to reduce the deficit on housing from 12.3 in 2016 to 9.9 in 2021. Needless to say that we were not talking about just houses, but free green space, community service, a new vision. What is you were talking about at the beginning of the session about the new urban agenda with this paradigm shift. So this is much about that.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for this first round of comments based on your experience. As the audience can tell, there's very different entry points to talk about similar goals and similar targets. I know there are a lot of questions on Slido, but I would like to speak to human beings before I actually dive into the app, so to speak. Is there anyone that'd like to take the floor to ask any one of our speakers today a question or share with us an experience that the comments of the speakers made them think about? The floor is open. Need the mics. I need a colleague to run. Thanks. So there's a hand right there at the back. And yes. Please just introduce yourselves in 1 second and then ask your question.
My name is Rachel. I'm the gender focal point for UNOPS. And I'm asking you in person because my character limit is too much for Slido. So this question is for Eloise. What is Geneva doing to ensure that women-led businesses and organizations have access to procurement opportunities and grant funding in Geneva?
Thanks a lot. So I'll just take 2 more questions, and then would you? Okay, I think the question needs to be repeated to Eloise. A little slower and louder.
Okay, sorry. What is Geneva doing to ensure that women-led and owned businesses and organizations have access to procurement opportunities and grant funding within Geneva?
Okay. I'll let you think about it. I'll take 2 more questions. Yes, the lady in the back.
Thank you. My question, it's on safety, security, so it applies to the two speakers. And I very much appreciate this whole session on elements of making cities sustainable. I like the point that was made. How can we keep people safe? We suggest things we have to do. I like the alternative question. How can people keep themselves safe? And with all due respect to everything that's done, when a woman is actually being violated or being accosted, there's some fundamental things that need to be done. That I came in late, I got lost, so maybe it's addressed. But I wonder whether the strategies of how to keep women safe actually include the training of women for self-defense. We all take these exercises to get slim. You know, for the technology people, perhaps this is something that could be done. You know, and I'm speaking, it's very simple, it's quite fundamental, but in all the strategies, we actually don't address the issue of masculinity and male and the power dynamics that's actually involved. And we question, why do men actually do what they do? And why is it women actually need to do certain other things to help keep themselves safe?
Thank you very much. So the dimension of how can people keep themselves safe. I'll take a third question and then open it up And then I'd like to give the floor to the director of the Office of UN Women here in Geneva to give a few comments. Yes, third question.
Thank you. I would like to share my experience. It's totally related to gender issues and about urbanization. I'm from United Nations Women's Guild. I'm an executive committee member in charge of education and activities. We are an organization under UN, and what we do is we have almost 600 ladies who is trying to do good work for the world. What we do is we train the ladies. We do projects to support the children and women in need throughout the world. We have a problem at the moment. The villa we are using at the moment will be soon demolished, and because Ville de Genève will be making new constructions in our place, and we will be losing this space. It is very nice to talk about supporting women, talking about developments, the positive things we do. But we are also here in Geneva, in the heart of Geneva, in the heart of UN, we are also expecting support.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you very much for that point. So I'll just bounce it back to the panel. The question on, how can people also take care of themselves? So bouncing it back also to people's responsibilities. I see a lot of nodding, and Jane, you were the one nodding most. So I'd like to give you an opportunity to react.
Yeah, and that really, to me, comes back to the importance of gender-responsive policing, which isn't about just women, it's about men and women. Part of certainly SDG 5 and SDG 11 even is about women's access to justice. Obviously, well, it's probably not obvious, but I'm a great passionate believer that women police can bring a huge change to the safety and security of women and girls in communities. And I can give you lots of examples of why that is a reality. Obviously, policing is male-dominated. Most of the policymakers, decision-makers are men, and things like that. But even down to what crimes are treated with more importance, can make a huge difference. But one thing is, we're talking about how women feel safer, and I mean, that keto, great. But sometimes even just seeing female officers on the street can have a huge impact. Now, one of the projects I was involved in Albania was to integrate women leaders into operational command positions, because they'd only come up through the administration site. And one of my first graduates of the programme became the first ever female district commander in Albania, operational police officer, in a rural district of northern Albania. Now, I was fortunate that 3 months after she was imposed, I actually went and did some research and spoke to 2 community focus groups, one of men and one of all women. And one of the comments from the women's group, the men were really supportive of having a female police leader. But one of the women said, we feel safer. Just by the fact that they could see that their local police was run by a woman made them feel safer, because they understood that someone now in charge of their safety and security, well, not in charge of, but had a big involvement in, was like them, so they would understand their needs. Mm-hmm. And, going to your point about how people can keep themselves safe, a huge change took place from the UK in community and neighbourhood policing. And this, again, is where women can really be of benefit. Women in policing are the ones that will tend to reach out to women and girls in community. And I know certainly some of our women's police associations in different countries actually do exactly what that lady said. They reach out, and they take women's classes. They give them assertiveness training. They help them to understand how they can keep themselves safe. And it can be just simple things. I had the advantage of being a police officer. So last night when I'm wandering around Geneva, you know, I am consciously thinking, right, okay, I'm going to ask this person for directions. I'm not going to ask this person. But there are such simple things that you can do. But again, keeping people safe is not the role solely of police officers.
Thank you for them. I think that's that answering beautifully your question. But I saw so much nodding also from Manuela and Leonard that I'd like to give you an opportunity to react to that question. And I haven't forgotten the other questions. We'll come back to them. And I can see your hand up too. Please, Leonard.
Well, I'm going to answer this question and the one you unfairly asked me earlier on
about the good examples.
About something positive. And journalists don't do positive, you know that. So, but seriously, in Typhoon Haiyan in Philippines in 2013 was the most southerly typhoon. It was also at the time the world's strongest ever typhoon. Climate change, call it what you want. But what it really did is it hit a community that was not used to typhoons. For them, they happened up in the north of the Philippines, and their matchstick houses built over the sea, because they don't have land rights, were blown to smithereens with 1 million people plus dispersed. Huge vulnerabilities to women and girls. Traffickers, you know, coming to the area like flies, and enormous problems. But one really good piece that happened is that thanks to an outfit called First Response Radio, which had been doing some preparatory work, and that's important, and had a kind of radio station in a suitcase. Just remember, everything was flattened. There was nothing there. It was all gone. All the technology was gone. But they had pre-positioned a radio station in a suitcase with a local community radio station led by a fantastic young woman. But to cut a long story short, they began 10 months of community radio engagement. This is not commercial radio where they're trying to sell you cigarettes and sweet drinks and make money for large corporations. There's plenty of that happening as well. This is community engagement. And I think I would posit, I don't have evidence for it, that this is primarily a female-driven enterprise because they're interested in the next house. How can we make it more storm-proof? It's quite simple. There's some simple things you can do. And they were bringing the international community to the radio station and getting them to explain to a broader population lots of interesting things. House construction, health. But here's the nice piece. Everything they did in that 10 months that the radio station was on air was recorded and was shipped off to some academics in Scandinavia who did a deep dive into what happened. And the conclusions were presented recently at the IOM. Peer-reviewed research. There were immediate and sustainable health benefits from having community radio after the onset of a crisis. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Absolutely. I'll give Manuela a chance to react to that, and then I'd just like Eloise to answer the question that was asked by you in terms of access to resources for women's initiatives in the city of Geneva. Then I'd like to give the floor to the director of UN Women here in Geneva, and then I'll open the floor again. Manuela, to the last question on how can people actually contribute themselves to being safer?
To being safer, right. Well, we all know that knowledge is power, and Monica, you said freedom is power. If you can move from point A to B and feel safe, then that's extraordinary. And I'd like to give a big shout out to Saudi Arabia for finally allowing women to drive. That's absolutely incredible. I mean, think about the opportunities that exist about being safe, about being more economically productive, about having an opportunity to create a business and to move from point A to B and not rely on anyone else. So that to me translates not just to freedom, but to safety as well. And then there's also all sorts of initiatives from other car makers. I mean, Ford has worked a lot with Saudi Arabia on this, and Mercedes-Benz has an initiative on empowering women called She's Mercedes. But I think being safe is something that we all have to think about collectively, and men and women have to work together. It's not about resilience, it's about working together. So I think with the role of technology, Monica, you mentioned the Wi-Fi. With self-driving cars, we have self-driving shuttles. I mean, cars can come pick you up and move you from point A to B in a very safe manner. Just to wrap up, it's about how do we keep people safe? And we, again, all have to work on it collectively, whether we're a car maker, or a technology company, or a government official. But we also need to think about how do we save lives? And I think this is the role that the companies that I advise on and I work with are very much focused. How do we save lives? And then how do we keep people safe?
Thank you very much, Manuela. Eloise, I'd like you to comment, if possible, on the very first question that came.
But maybe I would just also like to
react
to that point if I can.
Of course.
Because it's very interesting. I think that we all agree about the fact that women should feel safe in the public space. But I think that the answer to this thing is not only on a security level, is that we have also to see the reasons why there is insecurity in the public space and why women are victims of violence in the public space, and also connected to the fact that gender-based violence are happening in public spaces, but they are happening in all the spaces in the lives of women. And let's say in workplace, in politics, in family, and that most of the victims of gender-based violence happen or most of the violences happen in the domestic and the family space, and that the response to gender-based violence has to take this into account as well. And it's not, if we focus too much on the public space issues, then we forget that we, like all the other spaces where violence against women happen, and also it's like it comes to the point where we can easily fall into solutions that are going to be classist, or that can be racist, or that can be like, or bring back other stereotypes that we are also trying to deconstruct. And it's very important to us at the level of the city also, that when we are trying to think about what the city can do to work against harassment in public space, we do not forget that violence against women are part of the continuum, and that like being, I don't know, harassed in the street and being raped by your husband or in your family context and so on, like the roots of this violence are the same, and that we have to deconstruct and this sexist social roots, or or where it comes from in our society, because otherwise we're going to put a bandage and give the illusion that people are going to be safer, but in fact it's not going to change the society we are living in. So it's also, you were talking about, in the back you were talking about raising our children also, and talking about masculinity, and so it's a lot in the education, it's a lot in the training of professionals that are working with young people, it's a lot in the training of policy officers, of justice and so on, so that we can raise awareness on those issues also.
Thank you.
And make a real change, otherwise things won't change, because we just like put the people into bubbles and and put a bandage, but we do not address the real challenge that is behind. And on the question of how is the city of Geneva helping women's initiative, there is a lot of subsidies for women grassroots organization, feminist association. We support a lot of projects, because we never do our projects by ourselves. We always do the projects in partnership. So sometimes we initiate the projects, and then we go and look for the associations whom we are working like very closely the whole year. Or some associations, they come to us and they say, look, I have this project, can you help me? How can the city help to build these projects? And then either we can give financial subsidies, or we give material help. It can be like providing for a room for an event, or it can be providing for logistics for a manifestation, or it can be like in a lot of different ways. And then we also help these associations to build their projects. So we follow them, and we meet with them regularly, and we try to connect like what the
the local associations' initiatives are with what the policy of the cities is. And also we consult them a lot to see what their opinion is and what like women at the grassroots level are thinking, and how they are also coming with their own solutions.
Thank you very much, Louise, and don't be surprised if a lot of people come to you afterwards when we have an opportunity to have an informal drink. Thank you very much for that. So I think in this first conversation we had quite a lot of focus on the safety aspect of SDG 11. Just to remind ourselves, so SDG 11 is about making cities and human settlements inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable. Monica, you touched upon also the role of women in making cities more resilient. I think that was also interesting. I'd love to hear also others in terms of experiences in how the involvement of women has helped or will hopefully help in making cities more resilient and sustainable. But before I open the floor again, I'd like to give the opportunity to Christine Löw, the director of the UN Women Liaison Office here in Geneva, to make a few remarks. Christine.
Thank you very much, Nadia. And hello, everyone. Happy International Women's Day. I think it's important to just remind us quickly today why we're here. We're very happy to be a co-organizer of this fantastic event with these wonderful speakers. I won't be long because I think we have many other things to discuss. So bringing it back to International Women. No, before I do that, just to say there are also masculinity trainings in these manifold project we have with 27 cities all over the world, and masculinity is training very concretely in Cairo with tuk-tuk drivers. So just to make you think how far it goes. So it covers the whole spectrum, because cities are just places to live in. So we talk about the targets we have here. We cross them with SDG 5, which we know all the targets, they cover all spaces of life. So in that sense, we're talking about everything here. And then, of course, we also get to the root causes, to the masculinities. So, but the subject of today's day as International Women's Day is actually Time is Now, Rural and Urban Activists Transforming Women's Lives. So my question for the panel would be, we just had the key already a little bit of civil society. What is the role of civil society in your different areas? And you just said it like the participation, the inclusion of civil society, their contribution. What did they do? What are they doing? Or what should they, in what way should they be more included to make these things happen?
Great question.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, UN Women, for that. So I think I'll open the floor to speakers to react. How can civil society, or how has civil society been instrumental in achieving targets under SDG 11 and 5, or how could they do even better in the future, and how could policymakers support civil society even more so? Anyone would like to react? Jane? Jane wants to speak. That's great.
I always want to speak. Just going back to the gender responsive policing, and when we see in different countries where security sector reform is taking place, so internationals come in and they want to, post-conflict, they want to make a society safe and safe cities. And apart from the whole argument about the gender seems to be an add-on at a later stage instead of embedded from the start, there's a huge role in my view, between linking those in civil society who themselves get usually left out of all the discussions when we're looking at women, peace and security and that sort of thing. But that linkage again with policing, and certainly with women in policing, because there needs to be a reality brought to the table. And I don't think in some of the countries where some of these issues are taking place, a lot of the police leaders are men, so there's always going to be a challenge anyway. But I think that as police officers, and I know I'm retired, but I still count myself as a police officer, we learn so much by actually listening to civil society, listening to the communities. And for many years, even the UK, we say we listen and we think we know what local communities want, but actually, are we really doing what they want? Are we really listening? Because you have to build that trust and confidence in policing.
Jane,
so,
can you give Sorry to interrupt, but can you give us a concrete example of where actually the voices of civil society, when they were finally heard and not just ticked in a box, actually changed a policy? I think, Eloise, you said that in the beginning, that the integrated approach you have in Geneva didn't just happen, it was needs-driven. Voices from communities were saying hey, wait a minute, you've forgotten one aspect of the equation. Do you have any examples where by giving genuinely voice to the people, policies were drastically changed or programs were developed?
Sort of connected. I think if I go back to, certainly from a UK policing example, different targets, we went through a big period during the late 90s into the 2000s of being target driven. So, and the mantra was, if it's not measured, it's not done. So even filtering right down, from the leaders to the top to the bottom, you were always talking about, how much you were meeting these targets. And a lot of those targets were set at the Home Office, strategic targets, and then they cascaded down through the police to actual meaningful, proactive policing on the ground. Where was domestic violence target? There wasn't one at the start. Domestic violence wasn't a target. Many of the women in policing in the UK, and certainly the British Association of Women Police, they had those connections. They were the voice of civil society because the women's groups, the activists, those working for rape crisis, for running shelters for women, they weren't seeing this thing that this crime that affects so many people being taken seriously enough. So what trust and confidence does that give to women and girls within society of the policing service they're going to receive? So the women police officers, who were the ones generally, there were a lot of male officers involved, obviously, in domestic violence units, etc. We actually took on behalf of civil society and were their voice and took it to government. And eventually, we got a national target on domestic violence into national policy and into local and action plans. So it was more that linkage through the police women took the civil society's voices to say, excuse me, Home Office, UK government, so we're measuring how many cars gets broken into, but what about what's happening with domestic violence?
Excellent example, and I think that's also all about inclusiveness, isn't it? And reaching more inclusive cities where all voices are heard. I see a lot of you want to react to that. So I think Monica and then Leonard. Why do I always want to call you Don? I'm not sure. So Leonard, for some reason, Leonard followed by Manuela. Monica, please tell us all about the role of civil society and the policies you've developed in your country.
Allow me to give you a very recent example. A month ago in February, in Ecuador, we adopt for the first time an organic law on prevention and eradication of violence against women. And I say, well, what is unique about it? It's because for many, many years, civil society have been asking for it. And the answer was always, well, we have a penal code, we have these measures, we have, sexual harassment is a crime. But the call from civil society was beyond that. It was about gender equality, it was about prevention. And it's very much on eradication of violence against women. And then it comes about what the lady was saying about, safety, masculinity, etc. So it's really having a low aim to make the change, to do this paradigm shift. And believe me, it took the civil society organizations almost, I would say, at least 30 years to get it.
How important was the role of data and statistics in helping civil society make their point?
Absolutely. not only on data collection, but also on race awareness. So, because sometimes we feel that violence against women is something private, it's something, it's just that is happening only to me. So that role of the civil society on getting, saying, well, this is a problem that's beyond you. It's about how our society is built.
So the campaigns kind of supported the voices to actually speak up. Without those campaigns, people wouldn't have felt as sort of agencies of change. Yeah. Sorry, I need to...
And I give you an example of a very nice campaign they had a few years ago. The campaign was called So What? So, for example,
they copied us, exposed.
But it was about, for example, I'm a woman, so what? Or a man saying, I like women, so what? Or I like taking care of my children, so what? So that kind of paradigm shift, what is important, and it came from civil society.
Wonderful example. Important. Thanks a lot, Monica. That's very powerful. Leonard and then Manuela. Leonard, please.
Great. So thank you so much. I just wanted to share an experience or something I've been learning recently about. It's about a group in Sweden who are dealing with this issue, and I think maybe the elephant in the room as we discuss these things is not only about women, but it's about inequality. It's about people who are marginalized, don't have access to the table, and therefore can't participate fully. So we know that in many societies, I don't know if it's the case here, probably not, but 8 out of 10 jobs, you get them through your contacts, through your friends. I'm not sure what it is here, but it's certainly the case in Sweden. So recognizing that, after a lot of research and looking primarily at migrant women, but not just, but looking at the excluded in society, this really interesting civil society project called Open Door has started. And the idea is that they would simply ask anybody here as a host, if you like, with a very low expectation, just meet somebody, meet this person for an hour, that's it. Buy a cup of coffee. It isn't loaded with get them a job, get them out of poverty. It's just meet this person. And they're matched up through some fancy algorithm, so they're the same industry, same city, this kind of thing. They're finding that this is leading to 2 more introductions and is leading to jobs. Thousands and thousands of people being recruited. And I think what it's doing is that it's an example of civil society breaking the monopolistic power or breaking the rigidities in society. So if you have an unemployment office, they can't do this because they have to treat everybody equally. And quite often, getting somebody for a job is not about treating people equally, it's about getting the right person.
Right.
And quite often, the migrant women, are very talented, have tremendous skills and experience, but they just don't know anybody. So I think that's an interesting example.
Absolutely. And afterwards, it makes me think of a question that is recurrent on Slido, as I just checked here with my colleague, is how technology or artificial intelligence can actually accelerate results in both those goals. And maybe we'll talk about that afterwards, because getting people to meet around, I think you can't replace a cup of coffee for sure, but how can technology help that? Maybe it's a question for afterwards. You can maybe think about it. Manuela, you wanted to react to the question on the role of civil society.
Yeah, and I think it goes very well with what you are saying about jobs, and beyond that is compensation. That's something that right now we are facing in the United States. How do we bring equality in salary and compensation? For every $1 that a white man makes, a white woman makes 77 cents. An Asian woman makes 88 cents. And a Native American or Hispanic makes 54 cents to the dollar. So it's not just enough to get them a job, but how do you compensate for their skills? They're brought at that level for a certain reason. They have the education, they have the knowledge, right? They have the right to be there, yet they're not being compensated for that. So this is something that we're actually seeing some movement around it, and definitely I'm a big proponent of that, and working very close with different organizations and companies in making sure that we're actually making this change.
Thank you.
Right? We're compensating people for what they're deserving.
Thanks a lot, Manuela. I'd like to open it up again to our guests this afternoon, and then I'll come back to my AI question. Yes, please. My colleagues here with the mic, and then the gentleman in the back.
Yes. My name is Taroub Lebdour. I am from Jordan. My question is, how can we make cities safe for women who live in conflict areas and cities such as in Libya, Yemen, and Syria? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, the gentleman with the beautiful beard.
Yes, thank you. Gustav Grob from the Cercle Mondial de Consensus in Geneva. We handled these questions last week intensively in the civil society meetings. It was very useful. And also in the same week, human rights. Now, I have a question to all these ladies here, because we have a majority of ladies. Who likes arms? Principle 12, you know.
You mean weapons?
Sustainable, yeah, sustainable production. I raised this. Are arms sustainable? Shouldn't we prohibit it completely? And we make an initiative. I'll give you a copy of it. We call it now, in cooperation with the US out of Florida, with Asia, with Africa, the murder-free society, which means no more poisons, no more knives to kill people, no more arms, no more pistols. This is a big, big challenge. And it's principle 16, as you know.
Absolutely.
And 12, you know. So we should unite.
Thank you for your points on goal 16. I think a lot of the comments that are made this afternoon are very much pointing to the fact that our entry point is on, as you say, sir, on 5 and 11, but it's obviously much broader than that, isn't it? And I think your point is such an important one, right? How are we going to ensure safety for women and for the entire community, I would say, in conflict areas and post-conflict? I'm not sure any of us have all the responses, but I'd be happy to open it up also to colleagues. Leonard, would you like to react to that, or would you like more time to think about it? Leonard, you're probably well positioned to talk about that.
I mean, the answer is, of course, with great difficulty, because conflicts are now spreading. They're not going away. Take an arc from, Afghanistan through the Middle East to West Africa. You now have sustained conflict, and obviously women, children, the vulnerable are the first and the ones who suffer most. It's really difficult to know, but of course, in the humanitarian sector, there have been huge improvements and huge awareness from PSCA, Prevention of Sexual Exploitation and Abuse, to gender awareness, to accountability to affected populations. Some of these things are respected more in the breach than the observance, I have to say. And sometimes it's more hot air than practice. But the debate is on, and I think the SDGs are helping, bring the rubber to the road, and making these difficult conversations, really making people really focus on them. So I think there's a whole spectrum of things that can help. We could talk about technology, and I know that technology can be of enormous benefit. I've seen in a country like Haiti, again, huge empowerment of very impoverished women through the spread of very cheap mobile phones. I mean, that was a private sector initiative. It had nothing to do with the UN, and it had an enormous impact on safety of women. I'm not sure that driverless cars going into elevators to take people up to buildings and putting them into their apartments is going to help the 6 billion, to be honest, but I'm not against it either, believe you me. But I do think that when we do talk about the exciting stuff, we have to recognize that the overwhelming majority of people in the world are nowhere near it. Even in the fancy cities, even in the great city of Manila, people are in 1940s jeepneys, belching fumes with no windows on the vehicles and ball tires, while the elite are driving by in our four-wheel drives. So the issues are, not confined. The technology isn't going to solve much of it. I think sustained attention and clever technology and appropriate technology and systems that are open source and that are available to communities to use without having to pay exorbitant fees, that's the road to go.
So Leonard, thanks a lot for the sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but I think you kind of nicely brought us into the question related to technology, because we know it's very much at the forefront. Everyone is talking about technology. Leonard, you alluded to the fact that technology is not always accessible to all. I guess the question I have to all of you as practitioners, what have been the technologies or what will be that you have either experienced or the technologies that you think in the future will both be smart, helpful, but also accessible to all in making cities more safe, more resilient, and more inclusive? Do you have any examples to share with us? Manuela, and then Leonard.
I think we've seen a lot of progress being made through the part of technology in medical space, in hospitals, through the power of artificial intelligence. So going back to the AI question, I think that tags with your question as well. We're able to discover new cure for cancer or for other diseases. I think, again, we can improve transportation. We can provide means to education and knowledge to people that don't have access to that. So I think there's definite benefits to technology. Will we see it everywhere in the world at the same time? Absolutely not. There has to be some progress and some trials in especially high-dense urban areas. But certainly the artificial intelligence will help not just in transportation, but in medical environment as well.
Thanks, Manuela. We're short of time, so we have another 15 minutes. I see that everyone still is eager to discuss, which is great. I just need to monitor a little bit the time. So Leonard, and then Eloise, and then Jane, you want to react to this point. If I don't see anyone nodded, I take it.
Yeah, I'll just speak really briefly to the technology piece. I think it's a question of support and appropriate technology. The private sector isn't always going to do it for those who don't have resources. I've seen situations whereby a simple hotline linked to a free phone, linked to a call center, can create enormous benefits at carnival situations where people are being abused or people are drinking or getting over enthusiastic about things. The ability of somebody to make a free call or text call to a hotline that is manned. But look, all of those pieces, the technology is the easy bit. That's the free bit. It's how do you staff a call center? Where do you get the simple technology that visualizes it? How do you communicate to the people at the carnival or whatever the event is that there is a free phone? How do you get the mobile phone company to agree to give up the revenue and give a free phone? Like, these are the bits that actually we're missing. The technology is wonderful when it's available, when it's accessible, and when it's got a workflow that actually works to help people. We know it works. We see it all the time. But it takes an enormous effort, and the public sector probably isn't best placed to bring it about.
Thank you very much, Leonard. The notion of access, was it Eloise and then Jane, if I recall? Eloise.
Yeah, I think that it's a question of accessibility, and then it's the question also of who is using this technology and how. I'm no specialist in tech, but for instance, in the projects that we developed on raising awareness, social networks, for instance, are really interesting in the way that it accelerates the message and the number of people that we can reach with the campaigns that we are doing, and also, for instance, the way that women can connect themselves and also have groups online where they can talk about the issues that they are facing. Or, for instance, we had a youth association in Geneva who launched a calls via Facebook to have testimonies of women, young women, and the different kinds of violences that they were experiencing in their lives, and that's how you connect people and you can collect testimonies and then build up projects, and that's really great. And we can see that since also we at the City of Geneva, we started using social networks, how more people are coming also to the events that we are organizing or to the projects that we are launching and so on. On the other hand, the violence and the hate and the sexism that can follow on the social networks, and how people can be exposed, people who are not conform to gender stereotypes or gender norms, is amazing. And it's also, the whole point is also about educating people and making them realize also that when they are putting comments on Facebook or other social networks, that there are actual and real people that are behind, and that we also have to find a way of dealing with that, because it can also increase sexism and other
excellent examples of striking the balance between opportunity and risks of technology. Jane?
I'll try and be very quick. I just had a short point as well on, I mean, you mentioned post-conflict and how to protect women. similar comparisons can be made on disaster recovery. And an example, the hurricanes in the Caribbean, you know, the UK Foreign Office were looking through their stabilisation unit to deploy civilian and police experts out there. Many of the things they were asking for are what I call the hard hat issue, so basically reconstruction, physical reconstruction. And the question was asked by a woman, what experts are you sending out who can look after and deal with and help prevent the violence against women, which we know research says goes up during times of natural disaster? And it was, never thought of that. So again, that speaks to SDG 5. There needs to be that gender equality in decision making and role. Going on to the technology, you know, from a policing perspective, and putting all the arguments about human rights and civil liberties to one side, you know, the technology now that supports policing, you know, from your surveillance cameras, CCTV, I mean, I'm from a public transport policing background, so from the whole of the London Underground system is linked by CCTV cameras, and the little card that you use to swipe your way in and swipe your way out, the information that provides in very quick real time when you do have a serious incident or you're trying to catch an offender is amazing. But, and you actually mentioned it, so I did to point, the whole way globally policing is carried out has had to change because technology also has brought more challenges. You know, if you look at all the paedophiles online, sexual exploitation online, all those sorts of issues, you know, it's not now about the police officers walking down the street anymore and bumping into Billy Burglar. It's now, you know, an awful lot of key expertise and financial resources, and globally police services are not as funded as they need to be to tackle some of these global issues of trafficking, of sexual exploitation, of all the things that actually technology is helping to fuel. So it brings advantages, but it also brings huge challenges.
Fundamental questions, and I'd love to be a fly on the wall in these conversations at the authority level to see how they're tackling it, how this also translates in budget allocation, prioritization, etc. I can just imagine at the city level how complex it is.
If you think about it, you know, if the people that are dealing with those sort of crimes are going to be sat in an office, probably in front of a computer screen. What is most communities want? They want a visible presence of policing on the streets. The two don't sort of...
And what does it mean also for the jobs of the future, etc.? Anyway, great questions. That don't hesitate also to tweet those questions on the basis also of what's going to come up in Slido and Twitter. We may organize another session on themes that have, you know, common appetite among all of us, and maybe also give some recommendations to folks in New York who may want to organize side events during the HLPF on some topics of common interest. So don't hesitate to use social media for that as we talk about technology. We have another 10 minutes left, and I hear glasses going there in the back. So I know everyone's kind of eager to have a drink and eat something. But I would like, though, to still give a last opportunity to anyone in the room that would have, a burning question. So I see 2, 3, and those will be the last questions. Okay, so the gentleman here, there was a lady there. I'm sorry, you had put your hand on early on. My apologies. Gentleman, this lady, and this young lady too, and then we'll close. Please, sir.
Hello, it's Dominic Woolsey from the Gender Mine Action Programme. So it was just a point to make about technology and SDG 5, and that actually automation and AI potentially present a massive threat to gender equality. They're going to wipe out millions of low-paying jobs and white-collar jobs as well, and that this is an opportunity to think about how we can either allow those technological changes to exacerbate gender inequality or actually assist through progressive policies by cities and by governments.
You know, your point is well taken, and I know this is a recurrent question that many have in the Geneva ecosystem. And versus us opening that huge Pandora's box, what I would suggest is that we take good note of that point, because I know it has a lot of appetite, and that through the SDG Lab we address that question in another event or another. But just for you to know that it's not that I'm not listening or I don't want to open it up, but it's opening a huge Pandora's box and a very important element of discussion that you bring forward. Yes, please. The lady with the glass.
Thank you very much. My name is Virginia. And I just want to go back, rewind a little bit, because I raised my hand a bit earlier. But this also maybe Janet can share. I went through a Swiss police training against harassment here in Switzerland. And it was extremely interesting and very, very useful. Perhaps a connection with the Swiss police and asking them again, are they still doing it? Because it was really very, very interesting. And as a result of that, I was in UNHCR at the time. And then I moved to IOM, and long before your time, we brought the people to IOM to do the same exercises. Very strong training in terms of how to avoid somebody harassing you, how to get out of some kind of mob harassment, etc. So perhaps it's something that we could also invite the Swiss police and ask them, how can they come in?
Thank you for that suggestion. And as you say, you're bringing it back to the safety dimension of the objectives of SDG 11. But thank you for that compliment. We also take good note of your comments. Last question was, yes, this lady here, please, you have the floor.
So my question is directed towards Héloïse and la Ville de Genève, as well as the topic of immigration. As a foreign student in Geneva, in a city full of immigration, as well as people and individuals with fewer connections, I was wondering how resources and information are being diffused to these individuals to help protect them in events of violence and vulnerability.
Thank you very much. I told you, Héloïse, you'd have a lot of people coming to you afterwards. So maybe, can you just give a quick reaction, or would you like to speak then bilaterally, or would you like to give a very quick few elements of response? And do you want to react, Leonard, or discuss after? Okay, quick reactions, Héloïse, Leonard, and then I'll close. Héloïse.
About like general information, there is a lot of work that is done by another department. It's not the department I'm working on, but to and it's in the hat of the diversity policy to translate a lot of the informations that are given in Geneva in many different languages, so that it will be more accessible to lots of people from different communities. There are also there are some point info service in the city of Geneva that are located in the different neighborhoods, where some people are answering the people from the neighborhood that can go there, and some people from the city are answering.
How do you know about those information points? How do you know where they are?
On the website. On the website, of the city, and so they are in the neighborhood. So usually, like people who live in those neighborhoods, they know about them. And then, for instance, on the level of women's issues and for instance violence against women, there is, for instance, an association that is funded by the city of Geneva, which is called F Information, who is located at the Servette, Rue de la Servette, and they are like an association. It's a little bit the entry point in the different associations in Geneva for women. You can go there and ask questions on a lot of different topics and get consults and so on, and advices. And
all that information is also on your website.
Yeah.
Can you just give your website? It's Ville de Genève.
Ville-genève.ch.
Okay. Very good. Thank you very much for that very concrete. And then please have a drink afterwards. I think it's a good opportunity to discuss directly with a representative of the city of Geneva. Please, Leonard, last remarks on that point.
Yeah, just very quickly. Many international folks, I guess come to Geneva and complain bitterly about it. I am not one of those. I think this is a fantastic city, and not because of the beauty of the city, but because of the way they invest in the city, the way they tax and invest in the sort of services we've been hearing about. And they don't do it through, you don't necessarily get to see it, but there's an awful lot of it going on. For example, speaking of the migration issue, so there's a group of self-created NGOs called Interactions. I just know about them because I've been to some of their events. Last summer they ran festivals in the park. They ran dinners for refugees and migrants. They've created a nice little NGO called Cuisine Lab. If you go to many of the receptions here, you'll find wonderful hummus and other kind of really tasty food being produced by this small NGO, Cuisine Lab. There are many small, micro, I would call it, initiatives. They are supported by the City of Geneva, as best they can, because they can't pay everybody. But there are plenty of opportunities for the people here to kind of support these initiatives, I think.
Thank you very much for ending on this, I think, uplifting note of inclusiveness at the city level and more precisely in the city that we're hosted in. Thank you again very much to City of Geneva for having been here. Thank you very much also, Monica, for sharing with us all your experiences at national and local levels and really talking about not only the safety aspect but also the resilience aspect of your actions and how the role of women has really been effective in that regard. Manuela, thanks also for bringing a totally different dimension to the equation through your experiences in technology. Leonard, also thank you very much for sharing your experience with the migration perspective. I think that was extremely, extremely useful. And Jane, pretty awesome to have a police officer among us with so much experience, both at ground level as well as policy level. And I really keep in my mind the comments you made about the power of civil society and how that really changed the face of cities. I think that was very powerful. Anyway, that's what I keep. I think we all need to digest this conversation that we had today. A great thing is I see the room was totally full when we started, and it still is totally full. So I think that's good. I take that as a compliment to our speakers. I take that as a compliment to the partnership that we've had with UN Women, DCAF, the City of Geneva, and the International Gender Champion Initiative. I'd like to thank our partners again for working so closely with us and in making this hopefully a useful event for all of you. As you know, the So What event is about trying to demonstrate in practice what intersectoriality is all about. I think today was an illustration of that. We went way beyond just SDG 11 and SDG 5, which was expected, because at the end of the day, that's the premise of the SDGs. If we see that there's still interest for these kind of events, we will definitely continue. Our intention is to have our next So What event where we will be crossing SDG 6 on water and sanitation together with SDG 10 on inequalities. And the reasons why we also want to address those themes are that those themes too will be discussed at the High-Level Political Forum in New York in July. Remember also that there's a media booth over there where we would be more than happy to hear more of your experiences as practitioners or just as citizens as to SDG 5 and 11 and beyond. Use also, as I said, Twitter, our website also to share any ideas you have or any feedback on this session today. That's our website there, sdglab.ch. And I think I'll close in just thanking you all for having been here today, having turned up in such numbers. I see a lot of familiar faces here, but I see also faces that I don't know yet, but you're all part of the Geneva ecosystem, so I'm eager to get to know you, but I'd like to know you, and all my team would love to know you around a drink more than in front of a microphone. So I'd like to close it here, and thank you very much again for coming on my behalf, on behalf of the whole SDG Lab team, and on behalf of the Director General. Thank you very much.